الأخ أسامة عبدو.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Can everyone hear me? Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. Thank you for your trust in Fortinet. I know most of the government sector today, they've got Fortinet somehow. It's either a firewall, next generation firewall, an IPS gateway, or it could be an email security appliance, or even a WAF technology. So what is Fortinet? Everyone knows Fortinet. It's an IT security company. We are taking care and we are dedicated to provide you a complete security solution for your network. Today's session is going to be about how to secure your internal network. Everybody today is talking how to secure the perimeter. This is what we call the old fashion. It's the fashion that we used to talk about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, to secure the perimeter. But today, there are actually multiple ways of getting into your network. معذرة أنا ترى الشباب برطوني صاروا يحكوا عربي فهلا أنا مضطر أتكلم عربي فمو متعود بس إن شاء الله راح أحاول أتكلم اللغتين. I'm taking care of Kuwait and Bahrain, so I'm resident in Kuwait, so you can reach me whenever you like. I'll be available around after the presentation, so you can come and talk to me, and I can give you my my business card. How many people were here last year? So we have quite a few people who were here last year. This is the same slide that I took from my presentation last year, because this is an ongoing problem. No matter how much you invest on your network, no matter how expensive are your devices, no matter the efforts that you put to secure your network, the loser is always going to be the human error. A human error can be due to social engineering, can be due to leaking some credentials. I've got one of my customers who said, I literally stick my username and password for the domain controller on a note on the monitor of the domain controller, which is very, very interesting. I mean, you bypass all the security measures. What's the value of security if you are bypassing it this way? So as my colleague said before, security is as strong as your weakest link. So just be careful about that. Today's agenda is going to be quickly about talking about security threats and challenges. Then we'll talk about some infrastructure evolution, what has happened recently. And then we'll talk about a new concept which has been introduced by Fortinet. We call it ISFW, or Internal Segmentation Firewall. Then we'll talk about some product sizing, some models. Maybe this is more specific to Fortinet. But then we'll have a quick comparison between ISFW, Ngfw, UTM, and most probably data center firewall. And last thing, we will conclude with a new concept which was introduced again by Fortinet. We call it the Fortinet Security Fabric. What is it all about? We'll come to know. So a little bit about some security trends. This is a report that was produced by Verizon. Verizon is an ISP in the US, and they really focus on different vectors, but this report is usually launched the first quarter of every year. They call it the Verizon Data Breach Report. This report shows that the cost of a record that is stolen from an organization is 58 cents. The one in the middle, there's no pointer here. So 58 cents is the cost of a record. This might sound a little too small, too little, but the problem is if you get to know that there are about 700 million records being stolen, which means the cost, the total loss is $400 million, which is too much. Then the same report actually focuses on these patterns, these hacking patterns or these vulnerabilities, and they categorize them in 9 different categories. Things like crimeware, cyber espionage, denial of service attacks, sometimes web application attacks, so which requires web application firewall and so on. Social engineering is a very important vector that needs to be taken care of by educating people with an ongoing process. The same report also shows some interesting statistics. We are still suffering from people opening emails and clicking on phishing links Now that phishing link is just a cost of 1 click, and that's it. My colleague was talking about ransomware. We have seen it actually in Kuwait. We've seen it in 2 governments in Kuwait. People calling us, say, come, we have an issue. The domain controller is encrypted. The files on the domain controller are encrypted. And my colleague said, there's only one option, is to pay the ransomware. I'm going to say there's another option, which is formatting your device. So the only solution in this case is really to format your device. It's not to pay the ransom, because the more you pay, you did not actually fix your problem. The problem is still there, and you're not aware of it. This is something to be aware of. The other problem is 23% of the recipients are now opening phishing emails, opening attachments, and this is another source of vulnerabilities. So it's not only the link that you click within your email, but also the attachment that you get, which may be a Word file that has got an embedded code that will execute something on the background. 60% of the cases, attackers are able to compromise the network, but this is not the interesting fact. The fact is, once they are inside your network, they don't find any form of segmentation. Actually, they find a complete flat network. Yes, there's probably a core switch in there, but they still can access the entire network because there's no layer of security in between. So they can jump from one VLAN to another. Maybe an infected user with a malware in there can actually have a connection to the domain controller. The domain controller is encrypted, and so on. So this internal communication does not have any layer of security in between. We're going to talk about this in more details later on. For the infrastructure evolution, cloud. How many people are using cloud? A lot. What kind of cloud are you using? We've got 2 types of clouds. We have got the public cloud, we have got the private cloud. Do you have any security on these? Yes, vendors usually provide security. But do you have advanced security features? Things like VPN, probably, to site-to-site VPN between the cloud and the internal network. Maybe some security countermeasures to protect yourself against ransomwares or some zero-day threats, some APTs. Do you have any methodology? And the biggest concern, according to their feedback, to the customer's feedback, is that the security is their biggest concern on this concept. So security being the biggest concern when it comes to implementing cloud. I get this question a lot of times. Is cloud a secure way of connecting resources? Maybe yes, maybe no. I personally don't trust cloud. I prefer to have an on-premises solution rather than hosting my stuff on the cloud. The next thing is the speed. So it's not like before, where we used to have 1 megabit per second of firewall or 1 gigabit per second firewall. That is enough for us. No, if it's perimeter, yes, it could be fine. But when it comes to the internal segments, you really require at least 10 gigabit per second of firewall performance. The number of 10G ports, the number of 40G ports. Today we have also 100G ports speed on the firewalls. Do we have any space to accommodate all these requirements? The answer is yes. Of course, the performance of the firewall itself. We're not talking anymore about 10 gigabit per second. We're talking about 100 gigabit per second, 1 terabit per second. We can achieve all of this using the ASIC technology, which I will talk about later on. Then we have the SDN. Again, this is the evolution of the infrastructure. How many people are implementing SDN? It's an evolving world. So today we have a lot of hypervisors supporting SDN, things like Hyper-V, Citrix Zen, or VMware. And we have a lot of different brands for the controllers. Controllers like Cisco ACI, VMware NSX, and so on. So this is part of the evolution that happens on the network infrastructure that we see every day. This is some study that was done by Fortinet, and they actually they've done this survey over 700 entities. They contacted them and they asked them, what is your biggest security concern? So their biggest security concern was actually wireless, as you can see. But the interesting thing, maybe this is not highlighted here, but the next one is the endpoint. Endpoint and wireless. Wireless is used to connect endpoints. So at the end of the day, you could have the biggest security devices and the most advanced security devices on the perimeter, but the moment the device comes into the network, a BYOD device, bring your own device, it's like a an iPhone or an Android device with a security vulnerability in there, you have actually bypassed all the security measures and end up on the network without any protection. So the endpoint is the biggest concern. And because it's connected to wireless and you don't have any security countermeasures on the wireless infrastructure, then you have a big concern here. Another study that was done by Fortinet, so compared to the year before, so today we have two major areas of concern for customers. The first one is APT, and the second one, which is the top one, is the next generation firewall, or let's say the concept of consolidation of all the security features on a single platform. So last year, APT was the biggest concern. Today, it's the concern of consolidating more and more features into one platform. And by the way, when we talk about APT, a lot of people get confused. Is it APT or ATP? I need to highlight a little bit on this. APT, what does it stand for? Advanced Persistent Threat. Advanced Persistent Threat is the description of the problem. Advanced Persistent Threat. ATP is the solution for it. Advanced Threat Prevention. So it's actually both. One is describing the problem, and the other is describing the solution for the problem. So that was all the studies that we talked about. And because of these studies that we came up with, we decided that we need to have a different approach, which is the concept of ISFW. ISFW, or Internal Segmentation Firewall, is not really a new concept. Actually, it's not a new product. It's a new concept, or it's a new approach. Okay, so you still have the same FortiGate with specific capabilities, high performance, high number of interfaces. You've got the concept of consolidation, the power of CPU utilization that needs to accommodate all the requirement on the network. So the problem that we face today is the moment an external entity, they throw some threat vector into the network, maybe an email, a phishing email that you click on, and the user, as I said before, it could be an unidentified threat, an unknown threat, where the user can click on the file and it will open up and it will reveal some bad stuff. There's no way to block it. It will start communicating with the internal network. And this internal network will start exfiltrating data. Exfiltrating يعني الداتا راح تبدأ تطلع من الأورجانيزيشن بدون علم القائمين على صيانة الشبكة. Without the awareness of the network administrators, this communication will start happening. You will start to leak some information that you don't want it to leak. So DLP solutions are also a key thing here. And all of this is because we still think of the traditional way. 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we used to have one internet link or maybe two internet links, and we have one way to get into the network. That is the internet, or maybe some WAN connections. Today, we are protecting using edge firewalls, protecting the perimeter, protecting the network from external threats, from the cloud, from the internet, from things like home offices or branch offices. Sometimes people connect to it. But the problem now is these exploits, or zero-day malware or identified malware, they can actually get into the network using different ways. One of them is through the perimeter, but most importantly is through the internal network. Like I always say, يعني اليوم الايفولوشن تبع النتورك صار متقدم بحيث انه الانفراستراكشر اللي جوا النتورك رفعناه على الكلاود، والاجهزه اللي برا البي واي او دي التليفونات دخلناها على النتورك. فما عاد في تعريف واضح للبوردر تبع النتورك. This is why you are not supposed to trust anyone. Don't trust your internal devices and don't trust the cloud. You need to secure literally everything. طبعا احنا بنتكلم don't trust. مش المقصود انه don't trust the person. The person could be actually fooled and clicked by mistake on some link and he's infected unintentionally. So this is the major issue here. So what we do in order to protect everything is we decided to implement the internal segmentation firewall, where if the infection happens to be on the network, there's still another layer and another layer and another layer when the file wants to transfer from one VLAN to another. This is where you implement the internal segmentation firewall. And internal segmentation firewall is not a firewall to segment your network. Just to be clear on this, it's not a firewall to segment your network. It's actually a firewall to protect your segmented network. So the network is already segmented using your core switch. The VLANs are done on the core switch. And the firewall, in this case, is a transparent firewall where you don't need to do much changes on the routing of the core switch. So the requirements for the ISFW is really focusing on three major criteria. Number one is the performance. A traditional firewall, a perimeter firewall, or an edge firewall really talk about a port speed of 1 gigabit per second, maybe in some cases 10 gigabit per second for the internal communication. But most importantly, when we talk about ISFW, we're really talking about 10 times the performance. So 10 times performance means 1G is becoming 10G. The 10G becomes 100G. This is the beauty of the ISFW. It's a firewall that achieves a very, very high performance on the network. The other thing is the number of ports. It is required if you want to segment every switch or every VLAN. In some cases, you want to segment it based on the physical port. And in some cases, you will segment it using virtual ports. Virtual ports means sub-interfaces. The throughput is also a major factor here. Talking about multiple of megabit per second or multiple of gigabit per second to hundreds of gigabit per second. The way Fortinet works with these things and addresses this high performance requirement is using something we call the ASIC technology. A traditional firewall has got a legacy CPU. Whatever comes first is processed first. It's what we call the sequential processing. So eventually, the higher the CPU, the better the performance. But you're not optimizing the performance of the CPU. And this is what we call sequential processing. It's everything that is done by a single CPU. Other companies, they wanted to do it in a better way, and they managed to do it in a better way by getting a multi-core CPU, empowering more and more resources into the CPU. And they got an off-the-shelf NP processor. NP is network processor. It's a form of an ASIC technology. But again, everything that flows into there is actually flowing through all the processors on the network. The approach that Fortinet uses is we still have the same CPU. It's a high CPU, depending on the model. It's an Intel CPU. And the way we do it is we are dedicating resources. So the CPU that you see here is not actually processing every single packet. It's used only to establish the session. Once the session is established, the actual processing is done on the NP processor that you see here. So that was very quick, right? So this is the beauty of Fortinet ASIC technology. ASIC is nothing but a CPU, but it's manufactured by Fortinet for a specific purpose, accelerating the performance of the network. Accelerating performance of the network is not only for network traffic, but also for the scanning capability of the firewall. When we talk about AV scanning, when we talk about IPS scanning, this is all has to be done using ASIC technology. And this is why we have another CPU called content processor, CP. To move on, and then this here shows you the approach of Fortinet that we have a very scalable solution from the SOHO, from the small office, home office. We're talking about SMB market, where we actually merge all these CPUs into a small CPU. We call it SoC, or system on a chip. And this is basically a CPU with all the ASIC chips on one piece of hardware. And we can scale up to the carrier level and the cloud level as well. The second requirement, which is very important, is the protection. A lot of companies look for consolidation rather than having a separate IPS, a separate firewall, a separate antivirus gateway, and so on. They're actually looking for a complete solution that provides them security on the network, not only on the control side, but also on the visibility side. Sometimes you want to have visibility on what is flowing through the network. And this actually leads us to the next slide, where you have a lot of, we say, the full spectrum of security services. So when we talk about antivirus, IPS, application control, it depends on where you place your firewall. If you place it on the perimeter, you might want to enable application control, antivirus, and URL filtering. But maybe if you want to enable it on the internal segments, you want to enable only IPS and antivirus to make sure that malware and attacks are not actually penetrating through. We rely on a lot of third-party validation tools. One of the ones that we actually like and always refer to is the Nss Labs. There are a lot of other reports like Gartner reports as well that we can refer to. But Nss Lab, the beauty of Nss Labs is actually it addresses the different companies from the technical perspective. They get models from different vendors, and they start testing the security capabilities of the boxes. And they have a plot like that. So you could have a very high-performing box on the network, and its performing security effectiveness is very high, and versus the x-axis, which is the better value, or let's say the price versus the performance. We call it the total cost of ownership per protected Mbps. This is where the Fortinet is actually playing it very well. Performance versus the price is not very costly, and at the same time, we are performing, we have very high catch rate, and we have high security effectiveness. So looking at some plots, this is the Ngfw graph that happened to be launched in February 2016. And then it shows how Fortinet is placed right on the top. And then we have other graphs like the next generation IPS. This is 2015. And this is the latest data center IPS report that happened, I think it was June 2016. So it's very recent, where we actually scored 100%. 100% means all the attacks that they tested were actually caught by the FortiGate device. The last requirement that's very essential for the control is the policy. Policy sometimes is a very tricky task. It's sometimes requested that you want to allow policy, if you have series of firewalls, that you want to enable policy from one zone to another and then go to the next firewall, have the same policy allowed again, and so on. So it becomes sometimes very tricky to enable control and visibility on the network. So the way we do it is we actually enable your orchestration using the SDN or even the management console, where we can actually provision and push policies all at once to the firewalls on the network. Moreover, we have introduced in the recent versions a couple of features. The first one is we actually can detect the firewalls that are presented on the network, and we can give you a logical and a physical diagram on the dashboard. Plus, we have introduced something called the learn policy. You know, when you configure a policy, an access rule, there are two actions, either allow or deny. So today we have introduced a third action, it's called learn. Learn is basically learning your traffic behavior and producing a report of what is recommended to allow and what is recommended to block. I can probably skip this one. It's done. 5 minutes? Good. So this is actually more specific about the models that we have. We have a full range from the small end to the large end. I will skip some models. A quick comparison between the ISFW and the data center firewall. A data center firewall is where you actually put all your segments and you start segmenting the VLANs on the data center firewall. But when it comes to the ISFW, or the internal segmentation firewall, the segments are already presented on the network, but you are actually firewalling or protecting and having full visibility on these segments in transparent mode. Very quickly about the security fabric. Security fabric is a vision for the company. Fabric is like a piece of cloth, right? Qumasha, where you actually have different components that you need to take care of. As I was saying earlier, never trust anybody on the network. So when it comes to a network like that, you start by deploying the firewalls on the different segments on the network. It could be ISFW, it could be perimeter firewall, it could be a UTM on a branch office. But very important is to have a central management solution, a central logging reporting solution, and on the top of that, a SIM solution. What is SIM? Security Information and Event Manager. Security Information and Event Manager is where we collect the logs, security logs, performance events, and this is the beauty of the FortiSIM, where we actually can merge two vectors together, security vector and performance monitoring vector, into a single platform. The next step is to implement the cloud security. If you have cloud security, you really need to take care of this by implementing some firewalls or email security or web application firewalls on the clouds. And next is the ATP solution, Advanced Threat Protection Solutions. And the way we work is we have different components on the network that can talk to a central sandbox appliance where they report all the zero-day and all the unknown and all the ransomware files to a single device. And that single device is actually sending the information, or let's say the rating, back to the devices that are participating in this framework, telling that this file is good or this file is bad. Application security, when it comes to things like DDoS attacks, web application firewalls, database security, we really need to take care of the attacks on the high level, the layer 7 or the application layer visibility and control. And last but not least, it's the cloud, the endpoint security. When we talk about endpoint, we talk about switches, we talk about access points, we talk about endpoint devices where you install endpoint agent. It can do antivirus scanning, it can do things like two-factor authentication. My colleague was talking about multi-factor authentication, something that you know, which is your username and password, and something you have, which is the token that you hold in your hand, or it could be an application on your mobile. And that's it. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
الحين فتحنا باب المناقشة. أحد عنده سؤال أو بيستفسر وجه سؤاله حق الأخ أسامة محمود حسام.
صباح الخير، يعطيكم العافية جميعا على العرض المتميز، وما شاء الله عروضكم ماكو مجال ان الواحد يسأل، ولكن أنا عندي تعليق بالنسبة للأستاذ حسان في الجراف اللي قدمته في اختراق الداتا بيسز 25%. هل عدم الاختراق للداتا، هل عدم الاهتمام، ولا الناس ما تهتم في البحث في قواعد البيانات؟ ليش الاختراق مع أن فيها تحتوي معلومات قيمة، مثلا قاعدة البيانات المالية القضائية، لكن الحمد لله إلى الآن لم تخترق؟ شو السبب؟
عم تحكي على الإحصائية اللي هي 25% من هي هدفها العامل الإنساني البشري. شيء ده طبيعي، اليوم الاتاكرز عم بيستخدموا خدمات كثير ادفانسد. هلا انا نفترض انا وياكي كونكتد اون لينكد ان، اذا انت اجاكي ايميل قال لك انا حسام بعثني لعندك لو سمحتي فيكي تلاقي لي وظيفه، بس انا وياكي كونكتد ونعرف بعض على لينكد ان، فانت يمكن كمستخدمه توثقي بالايميل، تكبسي على اللينك وينزل المالوير. بس اللي على الانسان، على التوعيه اللي لازم تصير، انه لما يجي ايميل اذا انت ما متوقعه من حسام يبقى حدا ترفيريو، مش لازم ينكبس على الايميل، لازم يتاخذ اجراءات، نطلع على اللينك، نطلع على كم شغله، على كيفيه مصداقيه هذا الايميل قبل ما نغلط، لانه هيدي الغلطه المستخدم ما بيعرف انه هو غلط، كبسه وحده بتاخذ بس.